Hello and welcome to The Bottom Line on TVP World. This is where we unpack some of the main business and economic stories of the day. I'm your host, Marie Cato. The United Kingdom and the United States signed a trade deal today, the first European country to do so since President Donald Trump started a global trade war. The meeting between Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, and the American leader started less than an hour ago and is still ongoing. Let's see on Kennedy's feature, which provides us with a bit of background.
US President Donald Trump's tariffs have been a major source of global economic uncertainty in recent months. But now, one country may finally be able to breathe a sigh of relief.
As you know, talks with the US have been ongoing, and you'll hear more from me about that later today.
President Trump took to his social media platform, Truth Social, to celebrate the first post-tariff deal and hinted that more are on the way. In return for scrapping the 2% digital tax imposed on major tech giants like social media platforms, internet search engines and online marketplaces, the US could cut or reduce the 25% tariffs on the UK automotive sector, with similar benefits expected for the steel industry. The announcement comes on the back of a severe recession in UK manufacturing, and while it might provide the troubled sector with a slight push, Ignacy Morawski reckons it won't be decisive.
I think they might find some chance in new trade deals to revive their factories. This might be a positive factor for them, but still, we have to remember it's happening after a decade of terrible production numbers. So I think I wish them very well. But I don't think it's like, you know, the beginning of some new era for UK producers.
The deal comes just 2 days after the UK's long-awaited free trade agreement with India, with an objective to increase bilateral trade by $34 billion by 2040.
Well, this is a historic day for the United Kingdom and for India, because this is the biggest trade deal that we, the UK, have done since we left the EU.
These developments challenge the popular narrative that post-Brexit, the UK would be in a weaker negotiating position than the EU due to its smaller economic scale. However, that no longer appears to be the case.
The cooperation with a smaller partner is much easier than to the comparable partner. Maybe that's why a very difficult situation is between the US and Europe entirely.
But this weekend, all eyes will be on Geneva, where US and Chinese officials will meet, hopeful that the so-called City of Dialogue would provide a spark to resolve the largest ongoing trade dispute. Mounting tensions between the economic powerhouses have led each to impose tariffs exceeding 100% on the other, but now they appear to be open to negotiate.
We're going to sit down and we're going to put very fair numbers down, and we're going to say, here's what this country, what we want, and congratulations, we have a deal. And they'll either say, great, and they'll start shopping, or they'll say, not good, we're not going to do it.
One thing is clear, some order is emerging from the chaos of Trump's trade policy, but it remains to be seen what the shape of that order will be.
The deal with the US is actually the second one the UK has signed in the past couple of days, the first being the one signed with India on Tuesday. Now, the question is, has the promise of Brexit been fulfilled and London is now successfully forging its own path? Or does Britain need to keep looking over its shoulder to the European Union? And where does it leave the EU when it comes to settling matters with the US? To help us understand all of this, we are now joined by Paweł Wojciechowski, former Polish finance minister. Hello and thank you for joining us.
Hello, nice to be here.
So, we see now that the UK has finalized a trade deal with the US, but it has had to offer some concessions, including digital tax to cover mainly American technological companies. Can we still consider this a win for the UK?
Well, if you say that you come from the very high level of tariffs that were proposed, considering that the trade between the UK and the US is very balanced, and then you go down with those tariffs, obviously that's a success, you know. If you go down, we'll go up from 146% tariffs on the China, and you go down to 60%, that would be a success. So the question is this kind of a game that, what you call it, the art of the deal, that President Trump is using it, and he can then say, well, I won? Or is it a kind of maybe some places around the world, maybe it's a leverage to get something else? For example, the issue for IP with China and other issues that are very relevant to the trade as well. So I think that in general, I mean, it's not a so-called a comprehensive deal, because that would have to be ratified by the US Congress. It's rather a framework kind of agreement. Some detail will have to be fulfilled, but basically it's whatever it is, it's better than nothing, you know. So with this uncertainty, you know, created by the chaotic announcement regarding the tariffs, that's a good news.
Some would say that perhaps this is the suggestion that this is the first step of something much more significant in terms of perhaps forging some trade deals with the US. Would you agree with that? Some say that this is really not all that significant, that really it's much ado about nothing.
I've seen Secretary of Treasury, Mr. Bessent, saying that we will have around 18 new countries that would ready to sign the deals. President Trump said we could sign deals with 25 countries which the US is negotiating. So in fact, and that's what he said, you know, it's not a question whether we sign the deal, it's a question whether we are together signing a deal. So it's a kind of issue that of course, after this Liberation Day on the 2nd of April.
So-called Liberation.
So-called Liberation Day, and before it was, of course, 12th of March. It was the tariffs that was imposed of 25% of steel and aluminium and automotive industry. So this is something that they're coming with a pause, with a 90-day pause that President Trump announced to negotiate all those deals, you know. So I think this first deal
we can actually just see images of the press conference with Donald Trump and Keir Starmer.
Yeah, and there was a conference, I was remote because on the line was a call made to the Prime Minister Starmer, and he praised President Trump for the special relationship between UK and US. Of course, it was easier to do it with the UK because a lot of things were on the line anyway, and trade is very balanced. Of course, there's a fair high portion of the, for example, of the services in this trade. So the portion of goods which is affected by tariffs is relatively small. In general, you know, UK has about a share of about 3% of the US trade. So it's not much, you know, in terms of other partners, Canada, Mexico and China is around 15%. So the UK is a smaller partner to the US, but of course there were some things that had to be straightened out. For example, the tariffs on cars, you know, for the American cars, caused that maybe only 1 billion worth of US cars were imported to the UK, and over 10 billion dollars or euro of UK cars were exported to the US. So some things had to be kind of discussed, including for example, the so-called digital transaction tax, which affects the big geek tax of the US.
Sure, but just taking a look at the UK, perhaps more in the European context, do you think that this promise of Brexit that was their original goal a few years back, do you think that this is finally being fulfilled for them, that they're forging ahead and they don't have Brussels interference now and they're able to strike deals that are actually working out for them?
Not really, because of course Europe has much bigger irritant to the US than the UK. Mainly because it's less balanced, like I said, the UK and the US has a much balanced trade. And second of all, the United Kingdom has a much smaller economy and much smaller trade with the US. So Europe is a real big market as well, 450 million people, an open economy, and negotiating as a one bloc of 27 countries with the US. So it's a different relationship, you know. The UK, of course, is a much smaller player, so it's easy to strike a deal, you know. With a country like, if you had one country you take it from Europe and you negotiate the deal, of course, it would be much easier. It's much difficult for the US to strike the deal with a country which has also the higher, you know, industrial base, you know, the higher industry. The problem with the US is that we don't know exactly whether Mr. President Trump is using the tariffs only for economic purposes or for other purposes, leveraging for some political issues.
Indeed. I wanted to ask about India and the US, two partners that the EU is definitely targeting. Brussels has been dealing with New Delhi for some time and has been busy with sorting out trade deals at a slower pace than the UK. Do you think that the fact that these deals might be smaller, do you think that gives it any benefit, any significance? Is it easier?
Everyone is trying to
strike deals.
Okay. The most important is that they are kind of stable, because what is happening today is the President Trump created such a high uncertainty that is everybody's looking for trying to show that we will negotiate with others. So for the European Union is negotiating with other partners as well, like the UK, you know, struck a deal with India, and of course it was not the intention of President Trump to become isolated island from all the other partners, because the supply chains are very complex today. So, for example, even some of the tariffs were imposed on China, there was immediately some exemptions. So neither of businesses in those countries are looking favorable at raising tariffs. You know, there's a policy which means for President Trump, I think, rebalancing of some trade relationship with all the world.
Do you think he's realizing that he's losing the upper hand?
Yes, he's losing the upper hand, and I think he's a little bit scared of that, because he sees a lot of movement between the countries, you know, between the blocs, for example, China and Southeast Asia. And immediately he's saying, well, are we concerned about that? Yes, we are concerned, because if there would be the US only left alone, okay, who has imposed a lot of big high tariffs with although we have the 90-day pause today to negotiate, still there would be a date that the tariffs will come. And this is about the reputation of dealing and winning effectively, and showing the American people that we can do it, okay, that we can do rebalancing, which is more favorable for the United States. And the economy is not doing too well. The American economy is not doing too well, so that has to be a good news, you know, to show off that, you know, we have one deal and there is a path for other deals, because everybody's coming, as he said, you know. I will not repeat the words.
No, we've got the quote. It's kiss his ass.
Yeah, okay. I cannot say that, you know, to kiss my ass. And they're coming.
We're brave enough. We can say it.
Yeah, we can say it's a quote unquote, to kiss my ass, and everybody is supposed to strike the deal. So it's showing that he's a big deal maker to the American people, and he can do better for the American economy and for the American people. I doubt it, but it's his negotiating taxes. We have to accept it. The UK was very polite, I would say, and the British Prime Minister was very polite and kind of pushed back on that. Unlike, you know, for example, some of the other countries like China, and therefore he got a first deal. That's all.
But we have the Chinese and the US meeting in Geneva. They're going to formally engage in dialogue, as we hear this weekend. Do you think that anything substantial is going to come out of these talks? And if so, what might you expect to hear? That
would be a longer road, because besides the tariffs and just the trade, there is an issue of subsidies, IP, security issues with technology. And those are very delicate and much different issues to tackle. And I think that after the deals will come with, you know, like-minded countries, you know, which respect democracy and rule of law, like the UK and the European Union, then it would be a second round that will complete the trade deals with China.
But if they don't figure things out, what are the consequences for Europe?
Well, for Europe, it's potential consequences that we would be, the market for the Chinese product would be redirected from the US to Europe, like we had in May of last year. You know, that was the electrical vehicles tariffs imposed by President Biden for 100%, and immediately the European Union had to impose its own tariffs for China to avoid the effect of redirecting, the flows of trade to the European Union. So this is something that has to kind of be square as well in this variable geometry of different trade deals and different relationships. Definitely, we live in very interesting times, and this is a good signal that something is moving ahead.
Moving.
And the American administration is kind of, Mr. Lutnick, who is the chief negotiating reform for trade, is kind of moving backwards and telling all the advisors as well, we have to do something now and show that we are moving forward.
But one thing that attracts our attention is that Trump's previous term was characterized by the fact that the US was trying to address trade issues, but they were classed into two types. There were the easy ones and there were the hard ones. And they managed to address the easy ones, but the hard ones really were never resolved, and they circled around issues like IP theft, state subsidies for business, and there was just a lot of finger wagging, some nasty words, but in the end they were never really addressed. Do you think that Trump's term in office will essentially end up being the same, another story where he makes a lot of promises, but essentially he never actually addresses the really hard issues when it comes to
I tend to agree with that. First of all, because if you look at global issues, which are the most difficult and kind of difficult for the US economy, it's first, of course, an issue of Ukraine, Middle East. Okay, it's just regular wars. Okay, kinetic wars. Second issue, of course, is the technology. The technological race, how to be ahead of China, let's say. Third one is financial markets, having the US dollar as a reserve currency, which creates an overall valuation of the US dollar and kind of lowers the US competitiveness. And the fourth one is tariffs, which is the easiest one to solve. So tariffs could be seen as an economic tool to kind of bring industry back and reindustrialize the American economy. Could be seen as a source of revenue, but it could be seen as well as a leverage on the first issues like technology and security, financial security, and then technological security. So I think those issues are intertwined, and it would be much more difficult to solve the technological issues. For example, the IP theft, or the all industrial policies that China is using.
Do you think, my final question, do you think that the US, Trump's administration essentially has realized that his economic policy essentially isn't going to work to the US's benefit or anyone's benefit, and hence we see all the movement that we've talked about?
I truly believe he got scared by the direction of the markets because in the markets, the markets went down after the Liberation Day. And the second one, there was a surprise that the dollar went down, which is kind of in the opposite direction than in the first term of President Trump. That shows maybe some countries which have large exposure to the treasury bonds, the US treasury bonds, maybe start selling off, for example, Japan and China. Maybe, who knows, in the market. So that caused the dollar to go down. So this is unusual, and that means that he got a little bit scared, and now he wants to show the results and striking deal after deal.
Okay. Paweł Wojciechowski, Poland's former finance minister, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much.
And that concludes The Bottom Line for today. I was your host, Marie Cato. We're on every weekday at 5:10 CET on TVP World. And in the meantime, for the latest in regional business, follow us on X and on tvpworld.com. And for more news and analysis, stay with us on TVP World. Goodbye.